I'm actually going to tell you that I'm totally excited to give this presentation today, and here's why. Those of you who know me and have known me over the years know that I only have one presentation. I've only ever given one presentation. I continually give it in hopes that someone will finally think that it makes sense to them. When I identify that person, I always get together with them afterwards. Okay, what did make sense? So, you know, but I really honestly think that we've gone past a point at which that now we can give a discussion of using EBIPM that really does a very clear job of showing how you can use EBIPM to make decisions on what to do. And that's really what the focus of this presentation is an attempt to try to link the principles that Jeremy clearly indicated come from all of the synthesis of knowledge of the literature. So you as a manager are looking outside at all of this literature, and there is absolutely no way in which you can look at all of the research that's being done and have any clue of how to bring that together into something useful to you. And what a principle does is to try to take all of that information and synthesize it down to sort of a rule of thumb for you. That in most cases, in most tricky cases, you know, sure, it depends on these different conditions, but in most cases, this is something you need to do. And that's what the principle is, really the synthesis of all the information. What I want to talk about are not a lot about the processes, because we've been talking about that, but processes are the scientific information and data that's collected about what we know about plant community change and dynamics, and we turn those into principles so that they become rules of thumb for managers, and then the rules of thumb are stated in a way that they provide guidance on how you might then alter the system to address the principles. So my talk really is less about processes, because I'm going to use the principles that are generated already by Jeremy and that stuff in the back, and I'm going to say, how do we apply these principles? This is a new thing for us, because frankly, the way it's worked in the past is that we've given the model, the overall general model, and then we would talk about the assessment, we would talk about principles, and then when we got to the point at which we would say, and here's how you make a decision using this, we would create this diversion, and we would sort of like magic. Brenda, you are still alive back there? Okay, we would create this diversion, and what we'd ask people to do is to sort of imagine this magic goes on, and so we would like turn out all the lights, and then we would turn them back on and go, okay, see, that's how it worked. And everyone would go, yeah, you know, that looked pretty good, and we got an outcome, but we weren't really confident or sure about how we got to a spot. And what's really nice now is that this will be the same presentation I always give, except for I won't have to throw pixie dust at the screen and have you imagine that you had the outcome you wanted. I'm actually going to be able to take you through the thought process that teaches you how to actually employ the EBIPM system to make decisions. And so the overview is the one you keep getting, which is we have to stop treating symptoms. We have to start treating the underlying cause of the problem if we're going to be successful in dealing with invasive species. And the goal here of the entire EBIPM program is really to get us past the point at which we're treating symptoms on into the idea that we're treating and understanding and treating the underlying causes by modifying ecological processes to direct plant community change. And that's the way it's clear to me that we have to move towards developing truly sustainable land management types of programs. The basis for doing so is in the literature, and it's a successional dynamics model that says that there's basically 3 causes of why plant communities change. There's that the site might be available, or you need to take sites away from species you don't want, or make sites available or niches available for the species you want. You got to make sure that the species are there, that species availability that you want, and take the species away that you don't want. And then when you get them there, then you have to help them grow and do better, okay? This is really the ecological basis for integrated pest management. When pest management said, you need to integrate them, and all of our weed management discussions would go, well, I combine this, and I combine that, and this, and this, and who, and that, and this, and that. We combine them. Well, that really is like sort of, was IPM at one time, and the nature of the IPM was that we would combine things very simply because we thought combining them would be better. The real question is why would combining two things be better? On what basis would you link two treatments because they would do a particular thing? That's the question for IPM. And where EBIPM is different than IPM is that EBIPM uses our understanding of ecology to answer the question as to what and why would you link particular types of management programs together. And so it's an IPM kind of thing, but it's really using science to decide ahead of time what makes most sense for you to try to include in your IPM type of program. You've all seen this, and I'm going to try to focus in on an area of it that I think is the essential nugget in the EBIPM process. We all talk about all these 5 steps that we've been going through each time where we go out, try to find out what processes are really, what causes are the most important, what processes are in disrepair, and then try to find out which principles, which rules of thumb apply to each of those processes, and then link a particular management strategy to try to satisfy what that principle tells you should do. We state our principles in the form of what we want your tool to do. So it's not a tool-based program where I like bugs, or I like sheep, or I like herbicides. It's a base that says, I need to achieve this ecologically. I need this to happen in order for this plant community to move from undesired plants to desired plants. Ecologically, I have to do this. And then among your suite of tools that you have, you very carefully pick and choose them to achieve that particular target principle. Does this make any sense to anybody but me? Raise your hand if it makes sense. Like, this is the first time I've been able to use this presentation that I have without magic. And so I get to ask you if you understand, where before I just sort of didn't want to know for sure. The basic premise of the EBIPM and this model is that there are really 2 ecological vegetation goals that you might have. And I think the idea that we would like to have to maximize diversity in the plant community is an important goal. See, the principles have to be related to an outcome. And so this is the outcome, that these principles that Jeremy's been working on and that I'm going to present now, they're really based upon 2 fundamental goals, which are we think we need to have diverse plant communities, and we also think we need to have maximum production. What we think that does for us is give us the least amount of potential for reinvasion, because if you maximize niche occupation and maximize production, most of the resources in the system will be used by something you like rather than something you don't like. We also think that when you think about the ecological functioning of the plant community, by having maximum biomass and maximum diversity, you will have probably the most sustainable type of systems. When I'm talking about systems functioning, I'm talking about nutrient cycling and hydrologic cycling and energy flow. That probably is going to relate to that. And definitely, if you think about your land use objectives, whether it's wildlife or livestock or whatever it is, doing these 2 things are probably going to optimize your land use objective goals as well. So these are the 2 main things that we're trying to achieve with EBIPM when we're trying to deal with the invasive species, and that's what these principles actually relate to. And so the area that I'm actually going to work hardest in here now is saying, okay, we have a list of principles, and then we're going to try to figure out how we choose ahead of time. When you hear people talk about, historically when we've talked about EBIPM, we would say, okay, here's what we did, and then we put it in an EBIPM context. Here's what we, even Tom, if you look at his presentation, here's what we did, and this addressed site availability, addressed species availability. What I want you to be able to do is to not know what you did and be able to use the model to say, what should I do? Okay, that's a little bit different. So now we're trying to get to the point of saying, I don't know for sure what to do, but how do I use EBIPM to figure it out? And so I'm going to be working right in that area between step 3 and step 4, where we're trying to connect the principles with the actual management decision that you make. And I'm going to actually go through an exercise where we make a management decision for a particular system and show you how it becomes a very comprehensive, integrated management program for a particular system, and how we used EBIPM to come up with what we were going to do and what the entire management plan then looked like. Of course, we have to know what's in disrepair. We have to know what the fundamental causes and the processes associated with the invasion process have changed. And so Ed, after we have a break, Ed Vasquez will talk about how we can use the rangeland health assessment, categorize the 17 indicators of the rangeland health assessment into various components that are related to the 3 causes of succession, and then use the degree to which your assessment suggests your site deviates from some representative site or some site that you really like, and use that as an indicator of what processes and what causes and processes might be in disrepair. He's going to get really heavily into that, but the first thing I've got to know to make my management decision is which causes seem to be the dominant ones in the system that are confusing the system and allowing the weeds to invade, and what ecological processes are associated with them. And if I know that, and he's going to teach you how to do that, and if I know that, I can identify the causes, and then I identify the processes, then the next thing we're going to do is to try to say, okay, what are the principles that are associated with each of those processes, and how might I employ those principles? Remember, principles are targets for you, ecological targets for you to try to achieve with your management. So when you pick among all of the tools and all the strategies and all the things you can do, you're going to pick the ones to reach this ecological target that you've made for yourself. So we have processes, we have principles, and then they help us decide what we're going to do. So I call it P cubed. This is the process you're using, is P cubed. It's processes turn into principles, and principles turn into practice, okay? So if we've identified, in this case, that disturbance is the primary process we're worried about, we have 2 principles that we can identify that are critical. We need to create safe sites for desired species. We need a place for the desired species to be. And in cheatgrass and annual grass infested areas, we need to remove the fire as a disturbance. Those are the 2 primary disturbance-related principles that need to happen. Those are what you need to achieve ecologically. Okay? So if you were interested in trying to create the safe sites, you might do some disking to create some surface safe sites for seeds that might land. You might you might actually do it more than once, because if you do it more than once, you'll have even increasingly amounts of safe sites. So by this disking, we're going to create safe sites for desired species. We also know that we're going to create them for weeds. Okay? So we're going to do it 3 times during the fall, so that we can, as the weeds emerge in the fall, we can actually disc them under at the same time. We're not going to do it very deeply, and I'll explain why. If we wanted to remove the fire, which to address this particular processes, then we would probably want to think about including in our mix a species that has late maturing characteristics, that stays green longer, way into the summer, so that there's some green material out there that will help when a fire shows up and a lightning strikes. It's not a monoculture of just brown, but there's some green in there to help interrupt the fire cycle. So that's how management's chosen, based upon these principles, to address that process. Other processes like dispersal and reproduction, which we talked about, what we need to do from a principle standpoint, and these principles are all back there, so you can get this stuff. But you can match the desired species seed numbers with the available safe sites, and from a management practical stance, we probably need to have 2 or 3 times the seed rate, because we have 2 or 3 times the seed rate because we don't really know how many safe sites are out there, but we know we want to increase the number of seeds that we use, so that we increase the chances that we reach a safe site. So instead of matching them, we end up dominating the system with the number of seeds so that all the safe sites that are out there get filled. Now, we'll get better at restoration when we can do a better job of matching the number of seeds we put out with the number of safe sites that are exactly available. The other thing we can do is we can put out 50% of them in the spring and 50% of them in the fall, and that doubles the opportunity that there might be increased safe sites at one time or the other, especially after a period of frost heaving through the winter where safe sites for seeds might have been created. So we want to match the desired species seed numbers with the available safe sites. We're basically, right now, the science only says put as many seeds out as you can afford and probably do it at 2 different times, and you'll maximize the fact that a seed might get into a safe site. We also then, from a dispersal reproduction process standpoint, are interested in decreasing the number of seeds that the weeds produce. And that's a reasonable rule of thumb, a reasonable principle. And in this case, if it's annual grasses that we're using for the example here, we're probably going to recommend a herbicide application. So you can see how these tools and what we do are totally based on what we're trying to achieve ecologically, right? I mean, I don't have to turn out the lights. I don't have to throw pixie dust at the screen. That's what I used to have to do. But I'm hoping you can see that here's the ecological process that needs amending or modifying. Here's the direction based upon principle as to how to do it, and that's how you might consider doing it as a manager. You can consider other ways, but that's at least there's a clear linkage between management and the ecological principle. And the vector for the linkage is the principle. A principle relative to resource acquisition. We like the idea of managing for a low nutrient status. These are things that Jeremy showed you where it came from. All this science and all this math stuff, and we all looked at that. And I saw a few people start to quiver, and I actually cringed a little myself. And we saw that, but all of that good science is really synthesized down into that statement. Okay, that's where that comes from. So we might want to manage for low nutrient environments, and we might want to maximize niche occupation. Those are two principles that are hugely helpful in invasive species management. And so you say, okay, I want to manage for low nutrients. One thing's for sure is that when you do disc to create that safe site, you don't want to disc very deeply, because the more deeply you disc, the more nutrients you whack out of old dead material, and it makes it available to the system. Usually the plant available nitrogen increases, and that will favor the weeds. So we want to disc very shallow. We also will consider, if we want to have low nutrients, using some kind of cover crop. A cover crop will will acquire nutrients that are in the system, and they'll be cached in the seed head of most annual cover crops anyway, and then a lot of times they'll get cached on into a hole by an animal of some sort. We do have data that suggests putting a cover crop in there is really helpful in lowering the nutrient status, which is really helpful in shifting the competitive balance in favor of the desired species. Okay? Maximizing niche occupation, that's an ecological objective you're trying to achieve, and you can do that by making sure that you create a seed mixture that has all possible functional groups for the system included in the seed mixture, so that you can, once the mixture is established, you can have a variety of rooting depths, phenologies, and different types of physiologies and morphologies that will help you maximize the niche occupation. Stress is also a process that's going on out there that you will find being able to identify as one of the primary processes controlling the system. Applying stress to invasives is one of the principles. Now, this is not rocket science either, but doing it is harder than rocket science. But applying stress to invasive removes stress from the desired species. So out there, the plants are struggling to survive. If you can do things to stress the weeds, then that's going to help your management. If you can do things to take stress off from the desired plants, that's going to help you attain your two management goals. So from a management perspective, you think about, okay, what are the things that I can do to stress the invasives? Surely, you know, you can spray it. I actually think that in most annual grass systems, we're going to be better off using some early spring grazing and some grazing management strategies that are going to really be helpful in stressing the plant. I also think that by being very careful to graze during a period when the desired species are dormant, but the weeds are, in cheatgrasses and Medusa head's case, when the weeds are green, is going to be able to put stress on the weeds without overstressing the new emerging seedlings. So again, stress is the process. These are the two principles, and here's the management practices that I chose. You can see there tools. You could use all kinds of tools to stress them if you wanted to. These are the ones that I chose in my image. It's really wrong for us to go out and say, I'm a grazing guy to do my weeds, I'm a this, I'm a that. Say, what's the ecological target you're trying to achieve, and what are my suite of tools that will allow me to achieve that, and which tools will probably do the best job for me is really the question, and the cheapest are really the questions that I think are going to be most important. Processes of interference, kind of competition. We try to advocate the idea that species with similar traits as the invasives are the species you'd like to choose because they're going to compete directly with the weeds. Species with the lowest R stars might be helpful, that is, species that are able to continue to take up resources when they're in limited supply, when other plants can't, might be something you might want to consider. Definitely the idea for interference is to maximize biomass productions with the species you want. By doing that, you exert the maximum amount of pressure on the weeds and you will reduce them. And so you basically can choose species based upon the traits, the phenologies, the morphologies, the physiology of the weeds, the rooting depths especially. You know, if you have a tap-rooted weed, you're gonna make sure that you put a tap-rooted plant in your seed mix that's going to be able to take that space that the weeds want. If you have a shallow-rooted weed like maybe annual grasses and Medusa head, you're going to pick something like maybe some Sandberg's bluegrass or something that has a similar suite of traits as the weeds, and that's the principle here. All of these principles, there's a whole bunch of them, but I'm just giving you some examples and showing you how they link to what you decide to do. So we take that entire discussion about all of those principles and all of those situations and processes that we discussed, management plans, and we create an integrated weed management program using our understanding of these ecological principles. And so it says, now design disturbance is your management version of site availability, this is species availability, and this is species performance. And so we decided we were going to disc it 3 times, and we were going to include quotient or reduce the amount of fires so that we have something green later. We're going to drill seed it with a diverse seed mix at 3 times the high rate, half of it in the spring, half in the fall. We're also going to spray it. After that, then, to address this cause, we're going to repeatedly graze it. We're probably going to rest it during the period at which the desired species are coming out of the ground. And then we're going to use a cover crop in our seed mix to reduce the soil fertility. We're probably going to use some cereal rye or something like that. And then we're going to use an entire diverse mixture of species to make sure that we maximize niche operation. So you can see then from understanding the basic principles, the processes that are dysfunctional or in disrepair, the processes that are associated with them, and the principles, we've come up with an entire management plan that's really based upon achieving an ecological objective in each of their cases. All of these things that we've decided to do here have an ecological reasoning for being part of our management program, and they're a significant part. In this case, what we found in our data is that you'll be where if you didn't use this type of system, you would get a desired plant community 1 in 12 times. If you use this system, and use these ecological principles to help make your management decisions, you'll be successful in your management 2 out of 3 times. Now, that's a substantial improvement over where we are today, and a substantial improvement over what other types of non-science-based kinds of way of thinking about it in business communications. So I'm just encouraging people to go back there, take a look at some of the material we have, take a look at this model. I've just discussed what I think is the essence of the model, which links ecological principles to management decision making, and showed you hopefully how you can think about these ecological principles as targets that you're trying to achieve with your management, and then pick and choose among the suite of management tools that you have to do the ones that will achieve that particular objective. Okay? That was my goal, and I'm convinced that, and I know from my own research, that if you use a much more ecologically based way of incorporating science synthesis information as principles into your management decisions, you will be much more successful, much happier, and then if people ask you in the future, you know, what did you base your decision on, you have a solid ecological foundation on which to say, this is why I did this, and this is why it may or may not have worked, but this is why it had the best chance of working. And that's the linkage between, in EVIPM, the linkage between management and ecology is really by using these principles to help you make your management decisions. And the principles are the targets that you're trying to achieve with a particular management strategy. And now you have a way to really integrate these management tools in a comprehensive and sensible way that has a higher likelihood of you being successful. Does this make sense to anybody but me? And no pixie dust, no nothing. I'm so happy because it's the first time I've ever been able to show you clearly what the linkages between management and ecology really are. Okay? Thank you all very much.